Hey Angela, I'm going to answer your question by video because there's a lot to unpack here. So, first, we say the person is not actually sick, but they're having thoughts about being sick and convinced that they're sick, but they're not actually sick. So, as a coach, I am not in a position to assess someone else's reality or to argue with it. So I don't know what's wrong with them or what's not wrong with them. If I were coaching them, I would ask them curiosity-based questions. Right? Like, so what do you know about what you have, your condition? Have you had tests done? Just real curiosity and not sort of like coming from a place of, well, I know better than them. They're faking it. They're not sick. They're delusional, right? Because if I come with that attitude, there's no coaching going to happen. It's just me being a critic. So the first step here is that very first lesson to shift yourself from critic to ally. And that might involve, first of all, assessing, well, what does that person want? You know, if it's true that maybe they're sort of overdoing it or making things up, well, what do they want? What's the positive intent behind that? Is it to get attention, to feel needed, to feel important? Is it to convince themselves that they're sick so that they will change? There could be all sorts of positive underlying reasons for for behaviors that we don't understand, right? Behaviors that don't make any sense to us always make sense to the person doing them, at least in the moment. They might look back and say, I don't know why I did that. But in the moment, there's always a cogent reason for any behavior, even if it's not going to achieve the goal that they want it to achieve. So that's one thing. Another is and I know you say, and I know all those thoughts will inevitably lead to sickness. So one of the things that I train my clients to do is not to make assumptions about the future, not to make predictions, because we don't know. We need humility about what's actually going to happen in the future. When clients say, "Well, I'll never be able to do that," they're making a very confident prediction about their inability to do something. So I want to make sure that I'm never modeling predicting the future because we simply can't know. So that's, again, it's another kind of assumption. We want to be real careful if we're approaching our clients with assumptions about they're doing it wrong or they're going to make themselves sick or they're going to, mess up in some way, that we want to sort of, as coaches, take a breath and reconnect with our mission, which is to help them not just solve the problem that we think they should solve. My goal as a coach is never explicitly, okay, I want that person to stop doing that or start doing that or change how they eat. Instead, I'm looking for sort of meta things that I want to work on. I want them to increase their ownership, right? Which means sort of their own taking responsibility for their life, some agency, and feeling like, well, this is on them rather than it's on somebody else. Um, Another thing that I want them to work on is their capability. So whatever they decide to do, I want them to be able to be better at it, rather than me saying, I want you to be able to, only eat plant-based meals or only do this or only do that. So, and I also want them to improve their emotional courage, their ability to feel things. And we're going to get into all this in the coming weeks. The third thing about this is you said, like, the person is asking for advice but doesn't listen to the advice and doesn't follow the advice. So as a coach, when people come to me for advice, I will send them elsewhere. So, well, I don't really know. I don't have anything to offer you in terms of suggestions or advice. I'm happy to think it through with you. And then if they say yes to that, then I'm going to do the coaching. Because advice giving actually undermines the development of their own independent capability in a lot of cases. But here, you go do this. Now, there's two bad things that can happen if you just give somebody advice. One is they're going to go do it. And this could be bad either because it's bad advice or because maybe it's not so bad advice, but you've taken away their opportunity to learn and to grow and to change and to think of it for themselves. That's one problem. The more common problem is you give somebody advice, and even if they asked for the advice, they don't follow it, or they follow it for a little while and they stop, which is what you say here. They keep asking for advice, and they don't listen to it and they don't follow it, well, there's resistance, right? So we say people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So if you're giving somebody advice and they're not taking it, that's a form of resistance. Now we're used to the resistance where you say, hey, you know what, you should really change your diet. And they say, no, I'm fine with my diet the way it is. I saw something about keto, I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm sure, you know, I have genetic predisposition to heart disease, nothing's gonna change it, I'm not gonna, right? We're used to that. We're used to people arguing, giving excuses, giving reasons, and pushing back. But another form of resistance is somebody saying, oh, okay, great, thank you, yes, 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 and then not doing it, right? The resistance becomes time shifted for a bunch of reasons. Maybe they're conflict averse and they don't want to have a conflict in front of you. They don't want to hurt your feelings. Or they're just offline and they're just, okay, all right, okay. And they're kind of, you know, in your mind you can see they're just sort of shutting down and they're not really taking it in. And then they're going to come back and do the same thing over and over again because really the dynamic might be, as you suspect, one of hypochondria or there's some other emotional need that's being met. But what they really don't want is advice. So if you're working with someone, and this is another separate but relevant issue, if you're working with someone who is resisting making progress of any kind, so every week you're kind of having the same conversations, you don't feel like they're moving forward, that becomes part of your truth. And you can say, hey, I want to talk to you about something. So I've noticed, and you don't blame them and you don't interpret, you just state what your perceptions, what you see. I've noticed that we've had this conversation about four times now or many times over, 6 or 7 times over the last 2 months. And it seems like we're in the same place we were then. Let me check that with you. Does it feel that way to you? So instead of you coming in and saying, you know what, you're dragging your heels, you're not doing the right thing, you're just not taking my advice, you're just stating the facts separate from interpretation and then offering it to them to check in. Because part of what you offer a coachee is a different perspective than their own. So there's a whole bunch of things in this conversation that are worth unpacking. So I thank you for asking the question. If you have more questions about this or follow-ups, just post them in the forum.